The wind blew softly through the small fields behind the wooden house, where Diep was hanging clothes to dry. The late afternoon sun painted everything in gold, and in that golden light, she saw him, James, walking back from the construction site, covered in dust, sweat dripping down his forehead, and yet smiling. To everyone else in the town, he was a fool, a man who had thrown away his luxurious life, his father's company, and all of his wealth just to start again from nothing. But to Diep, that very madness was courage, raw, real, and shining. People whispered behind his back whenever he passed, "That's James Lou, right? The guy who got fired by his own father. Yeah, imagine. Went to study abroad, came back, and now he's hauling wood like a farmer. What a waste," they laughed, shaking their heads. But James never looked back at them. He carried the heavy planks of wood on his shoulders as if they weighed nothing, his eyes fixed forward, not on success, but on purpose. Diep watched from afar, her heart tightening each time someone mocked him. She knew his story better than anyone else. How he'd walked away from comfort and chose honesty instead of power. How he'd refused to manipulate people the way his father once did. If building from nothing is madness, James once told her, then I want to be mad forever. When he reached the fence, James smiled, his clothes dirty, but his eyes gentle. "You're still here, Diep," he said, wiping his hands on his shirt. "I wanted to wait for you," she answered softly. "Dinner's ready."
He looked up at the orange sky. "You know, Diep, everyone thinks I'm crazy." She stepped closer, brushing the dust from his arm. "Let them think what they want. To me, you're the bravest man I've ever known." In that quiet moment, surrounded by the scent of grass and the hum of the evening, James realized something. No matter how loud the world's laughter was, Diep's belief in him was louder. The next morning, the town market was buzzing with life. Vendors shouted prices, children ran barefoot, and the smell of grilled corn filled the air. Diep carried a basket of vegetables she had just picked from their small garden. As she turned the corner, she saw James standing near the hardware store, talking to a supplier. His voice was calm, respectful, but the laughter from a group of men nearby cut through the air like a knife.
"Hey, James," one of them shouted mockingly. "How's it feel to be a university graduate hauling wood?" "Not so smart now, huh?" Another man smirked. "Heard your father kicked you out. Guess the big city didn't want you either." James didn't reply. He adjusted the strap on his shoulder and lifted the box of nails as if he hadn't heard them. But Diep saw the slight tension in his jaw, the quiet pain behind his calm eyes. Without hesitation, she stepped forward. "Enough," she said, her voice sharp but steady. The men turned to look at her. "You laugh at him. But tell me, how many of you could lose everything and still start again with your own hands? How many of you could smile after being betrayed by the people you trust the most?" The laughter died. The men looked away, embarrassed. Diep's eyes glistened, not with anger, but with pride. She walked to James, took the box from his hands, and said softly, "Let me help." James looked at her, surprised, moved, and for a moment, he forgot about the crowd around them. "Diep," he whispered, "you didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," she replied, her voice warm. "Because I know who you are. You don't need to prove anything to them. You've already proved it to me." They walked home together, side by side under the morning sun. The whispers behind them no longer mattered. Diep carried the weight of the box, and James carried the weight of her faith, and somehow they both felt lighter. That evening, as they sat by the small wooden table, James looked at Diep across the flickering candlelight. "You know," he said quietly, "every time they call me crazy, I remember your eyes, and suddenly, it doesn't hurt anymore." Diep smiled. "That's because love makes all the madness worth it." Days passed, and the small wooden house that James and Diep built together began to look more like a home. James spent his mornings fixing old furniture and designing farming tools to sell at the local market, while Diep managed their small vegetable stall. Life was modest, but there was peace in the rhythm of their days, until one afternoon, fate brought back the shadows of James's past. He had gone to deliver a batch of handcrafted wooden shelves to a nearby factory when a familiar voice stopped him. Well, look who it is, sneered a man standing by a black SUV. The great James Liu, ex-director of Liu Holdings. What are you doing here, selling wood? James looked up and recognized him. Min, his former colleague, now working with James's father. Min's smirk widened. I heard your father fired you. Guess running a company was too much for the prodigal son, huh? For a moment, James said nothing. The old pride that once burned in him had been replaced by quiet strength. He wiped his hands on his work pants, stood tall, and replied calmly, Yes, my father fired me. But that was the day I stopped being his shadow and started becoming myself.
Min scoffed. Yourself. Working with wood and dirt. Come on, James. You used to wear suits, not sawdust. James smiled faintly. Sawdust doesn't lie. It comes from work that builds something real. You should try it sometime. Before Min could respond, Diep appeared, carrying lunch wrapped in a small cloth. She walked up to James with her usual warm smile, completely ignoring Min's presence. You forgot your lunch again, she said softly. You'd starve without me.
Min's expression changed slightly. He wasn't used to seeing James like this, humble, grounded, yet somehow unshaken. He looked at Diep, then at James, and muttered, You've changed. James nodded. That's what falling down does. You either stay broken or build yourself again. Diep reached out and brushed some sawdust from his shoulder, her touch light, full of quiet pride. I don't care what they say about you, she whispered. I only see the man who never stopped trying. As Min walked away, shaking his head, James exhaled deeply. He turned to Diep and said, half laughing, half serious, You know they think I've gone crazy. Diep smiled, her eyes glimmering with affection. Let them think that. If madness means fighting for a simple, honest life, then maybe the world needs more of your kind of crazy. The sun was setting behind them, casting a golden glow over their little workshop. James looked at Diep, at her tired hands, her gentle smile, and the quiet strength that had carried them through so much, and in that moment, he knew her love was the reason he could stand tall again. A few weeks later, the afternoon sunlight fell gently across the yard where Diep was hanging clothes. The laughter of little Nee echoed nearby as she chased a butterfly with a net. Made from old string, everything seemed peaceful, until a familiar voice called from the gate, Diep, James, is anyone home? Diep turned around and her face lit up. It was Nee's grandmother. The older woman looked tired from travel, her hands rough from farm work, but her eyes softened the moment she saw the little girl. Grandma, Nee shouted, running toward her. The old woman knelt down, arms open, her wrinkles deepening with a smile that held both love and guilt. My sweet girl, you've grown so much. James stepped out from the workshop, wiping the dust from his hands. Good afternoon, ma'am, he greeted respectfully. You've come a long way. Please come inside. The grandmother looked around the house, the clean floor, the small garden, the table neatly set with simple dishes. Her gaze lingered on Diep, who was preparing tea, her movements calm and practiced. For a moment, the woman seemed speechless. I heard, people said you lost everything, she said slowly, her tone unsure. But looking at this place, I think you've found something much more valuable. James smiled faintly. We lost the company, yes, but we found peace and a purpose to live for. As they sat down to dinner, the small room filled with the sound of clinking chopsticks and laughter. Diep served food for everyone, making sure the old woman had the tenderest meat and Nee had her favorite soup. The grandmother's eyes grew moist. You'd love her like your own child, she said, her voice trembling. I worried at first, but now I can see Nee is truly home. Diep put down her chopsticks and reached for the older woman's hand. She is our child, she said softly. Blood doesn't make a family, love does. The grandmother nodded, tears streaming down her face. Then I'll let her stay here, with both of you. I know she'll grow up happy. Nee looked up, confused but smiling. Grandma, you're not mad? The old woman chuckled, brushing Nee's hair. How could I be mad? I've just never seen love so honest before." As night fell, the little house glowed under the soft light of an oil lamp. James stood by the window, watching Diep and Nee laugh with the grandmother. His heart swelled with quiet gratitude. He had been called a fool, a failure, a dreamer, but at that moment, he realized something profound. The world's measure of success meant nothing compared to the warmth of family and the strength of love that had never once let him fall. He turned to Diep, who smiled back, a smile that said everything words could not. They had nothing grand, no mansion, no title, but in that tiny home filled with laughter, they had everything that truly mattered. Life has a strange way of testing those who dare to dream differently. James was once seen by many as a fool, a man who had everything but chose to start over with nothing. People called him crazy for leaving behind comfort and reputation, for rebuilding a life from dust when the world laughed at his downfall. Yet, in Diep's eyes, he was the bravest man alive, not because he never fell, but because every time he did, he stood up with more kindness, more patience, and more love than before. True bravery is not measured by how much one conquers, but by how one keeps faith even when everything seems lost. James faced storms that would have broken many: betrayal, failure, and the cruel whispers of people who only saw the surface of his life. But Diep saw deeper. She saw the man who stayed up late fixing broken tools, who gave the last bowl of rice to Nee, who smiled even when his hands trembled from exhaustion. In her heart, James was not crazy. He was courageous, the kind of courage that comes from love. And Diep herself became the quiet strength behind him. She never needed roses, diamonds, or promises of luxury. Her love was made of small, everyday miracles: a warm meal, a word of comfort, a belief that no matter how hard life became, they could face it together. Through her, James learned that love is not about perfection, but perseverance, not about having everything, but being everything for each other when there is nothing left. When Nee's grandmother finally saw their life, she realized something powerful: that family is not defined by blood, but by the people who never stop caring, even when they have every reason to give up. Love, in its truest form, is not loud or proud. It is patient, humble, and enduring. The world might still call James foolish, but love does not need the world's approval. In the eyes of the one who truly sees you, your pain, your effort, your heart, you are already a success. And so, the story of James and Diep reminds us all, you don't need roses to prove love, nor applause to prove worth. Sometimes, the quietest people who keep trying, keep believing, and keep loving, even when no one understands them, are the bravest souls of all.